Hello, and welcome to Talking with Machines, where we gather for conversations about learning, digital tools, and the future. I'm Mark Corbett Wilson, a lifelong learner, artist, and retired high-tech glassblower. I spent 2 decades working in Surveillance Valley, making gas lasers, X-ray tubes, and the high-intensity lamps used in the manufacture of computer chips. Now, I'm a critical digital humanist, learning technologian at the Western Institute for Social Research in Berkeley, California, and a digital storytelling facilitator with storycenter.org. In sum, I'm a working class educator in third spaces who helps people glean meaning from experiences and tell their stories. Today, I'm joined by Bryan Alexander, Tom Haymes, and Robert Brem. Friends, please introduce yourselves.
Greetings, everyone. I'm Bryan Alexander, Senior Scholar at Georgetown University, a futurist specializing in the future of higher education. I run the weekly program, The Future Transform. I have just finished the first draft of my next book, Peak Higher Education, which will be coming out from Johns Hopkins University Press pretty soon.
And I'm Tom Haymes. I'm the founder of Idea Spaces, and we're working on a product called the Knowledge Navigator, which is a AI-driven concept mapping tool. I am also an educator, though, in background and consultant. Have been teaching for a quarter century now, and I've also been a technology director and many other things. So I spend a lot of time thinking about how technology and humans integrate with one another, where that's going, where it's been, and in particular the most recently the AI component of that.
And good evening, everyone. My name is Robert Brem, and I see myself as a futurist and a philosopher. I teach future studies and alternative futures policy analysis. I teach in the public administration program at CSU East Bay part-time. Full-time, I'm a political theorist and psychology instructor at College of Alameda in California, and I am a nationally board certified psychotherapist, and I do consulting. I also am on the board at the Western Institute of Social Research and will possibly be the president of the board moving forward, trying to actually adapt our institution to being a model for what education should be as the old models start to die away.
Well, and that brings us to today, when this is the day after the new administration is attempting to eliminate, I guess is the word, the Department of Education, although we're unclear on all the legal ramifications of that. But it's certainly impacting everyone in higher education. I'll start with you, Robert. What's your initial reaction to both the edict on the Department of Education and the general trend in the new administration?
Well, I have actually spent the past 3 weeks diving deep into fully understanding and comprehending the political ideology and programmatic aims of this Trump movement. Project 2025 is clearly there, and it's kind of nightmarish to me. A university out of Sweden literally just yesterday said the United States can no longer be considered a democracy. We are now an electoral autocracy. And we are following the game plan of Viktor Orban in Hungary and Erdogan in Turkey. And those all include deconstructing higher education as we know it, and as well as the entire infrastructure of government at the federal level. I could go down that rabbit hole, but that's not going to take us where we need to go, unfortunately. But yes, education. I have been contemplating that by the year 2050, at least 50% or more of all institutions of higher education that existed at the beginning of the 21st century will be gone. And the ones that remain are going to, and I say this unfortunately because there's this part of me gets dragged kicking and screaming into this battle. I don't like that the old model is dying because I happen to kind of like the old model, but I understand that change happens whether you want it or not. That's one of the curses of being a futurist. And so I'm curious as to both where it's going, what this new movement that's trying to reshape the entire culture in the United States wants of higher education, and how we can resist that and offer an actual robust new way of doing education moving into to the 21st century. I don't know. That's kind of the words that flow out of my mouth on that topic. I'll stop talking for a moment and see what you guys think of my thoughts.
Yeah, that's what we're here for. How about our fellow futurist, Bryan?
I've been working on this for quite some time. For the past year, I did a lot of projects to try to help people think about what a second Trump administration would be like. So we did a long online reading, Project 2025. We did a series of video workshops and exercises, trying to imagine different scenarios if how things might work if Trump won. And we got a lot of things right, including remarkably that Trump would win a plurality of the popular vote. Um, but what we're experiencing now is quite intense. I agree with Robert that Orban's model is one that's there. I think a lot of this is some traditional Republican Party materials. You know, the animus against the Department of Education dates back to the 1970s and its founding. Every Republican president has made mouth noises about getting rid of it and tried various degrees. And it's an open question to what extent the department itself can be closed without an act of Congress. Now, one thing that Trump can do, depending on how the courts rule, is break up pieces of the Department of Education and move them around the federal government. So a couple of hours ago, Trump made some noises about giving loans to the Small Business Association. Now, I'm not clear how far that goes. He said tens of thousands of loans. So I don't know if he just got the numbers wrong, which is typical, or if he was actually referring to a small group. But he also said some of the other functions would go to the Health and Human Services, which means, Secretary Brainworm can mess them up. Beyond that, I think it's quite tricky. I mean, if I shake the magic 8 ball, it's still pretty foggy. It's quite possible that we will see, as Robert put it, a shrunken sector. We've got every reason for this. I mean, the book that I'm getting ready to publish is about that hypothesis, about that scenario if higher education shrinks. It has been shrinking for the past 10, 15 years, and we could just see all kinds of forces press that down. And a lot of those forces are independent of the Trump administration. Demographics are not on our side. The economic model of higher education is not on our side. But the Trump administration is likely to make things even harsher. I mean,
Yes.
I think everybody has seen a lot of the current measures, cutting funding to research universities for one, kidnapping, deporting faculty, students from and recent graduates from others. But there's still more that can be done. And we haven't yet seen Trump really play with accreditation, which is something that he vowed to do, and which Florida gives us an example of.
Yes.
Depends on how Colombia responds to the extraordinary intervention into its autonomy. Quite a few state governments have been considering this in different ways. Tom and I today were talking online about how several Texas legislators have put forward ideas to, I think, what was the euphemism, to kind of scan colleges and universities for faculty bias. The state of Ohio has Ohio Bill #1 for the year, which is a very detailed thing to really change higher education. Kentucky just passed a law which would really extensively extirpate DEI from higher ed. I mean, and on top of all of this, we've already seen some traces of what Trump would want to do to international visitors. So, kind of the three categories of nations that from which people we would block, some we would really restrict. Most of those nations don't send a lot of students to us, but I think it's possible that we'll see a lot of the students, a lot of countries that do send students to us at scale, China, India, South Korea, Japan, for example, may be spooked by this and send fewer and fewer students to us. So I think it's possible for us to power our way out of decline. More importantly than power is innovation and ideas, which I think we'll be talking about. But I think a lot of forces press us further down the wrong side of the peak.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that higher education is kind of higher education. I want to talk specifically about that for a moment. Has kind of set themselves up for this. The value proposition that that is perceived by the populace, the popular, and the way that that's been sold over the years, everything from the accountability movement to the cost of tuition and all that combined. And then people go, well, I went to college and I didn't learn anything, or, I spent $100,000 or whatever. Or why am I spending all this money to send my kids to school? It's gotten ridiculous. And I still like to goose my students when I tell them that I remember my one semester bill at the University of Texas at Austin in the late 80s was $457 everything, tuition and fees. Not that everything but textbooks. So, um, and that's and the reason the tuitions have been going up. One, Bryan can speak to the data on this a lot more knowledgeably than I can, but it's the lack of public support, and so it becomes this sort of double-edged sword. And when I say public support, I mean for public institutions. So the public institutions, they have three ways of raising revenue. They can either take it out in tuition, they can take it out in uh, local funds, and they can take it out in state funds essentially. And if any of those go down, the others have to compensate. And the states in particular, I mean, if you have local funds, that is, and the states have been for community colleges, at least in Texas, the state has been really aggressive, and I think it's necessarily a bad thing. But they haven't replaced it. Is aggressive in limiting property tax uh, increase in revenue, because the reason a lot of the colleges down here in Texas have been so flush, despite the fact of relatively low tax revenue, is that they benefited from rises in property values, and now the state has sought to quash that. That's also helped the school districts as well, by the way, as an aside. And they've said, well, we'll give you money on the other side, but of course that money comes with strings attached, and then they don't do it because Texas in particular has no other real sources of revenue. Um, since we don't have a state income tax, we only have sales tax and fees and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, that's not a long time recipe for success. I do think that the colleges and universities have done a lousy job of countering this and selling the value proposition.
Hmm.
And Chris Newfield, has been a recurring guest on Bryan's show, talks about this idea that they made a huge mistake back in the 60s and 70s when they started selling themselves as a job training program, and that's not what higher education is really.
Hmm.
It is indirectly, and a well-educated person is going to be a better employee no matter what. But this idea that I'm going to become what's the point of being an English major? And that's what kills off the humanities too. What's the point of being an English major? I'm not going to be an English teacher. That's basically all you got there. You can't do anything else. And I'm living proof of the fact that you can have a liberal arts degree and be in a technology world. I mean, I went to work for Apple and Motorola after I got out of grad school for political science, and I was actually pretty good at it because I had good critical thinking skills as a result of the programs that I was in. And I could troubleshoot better. And I didn't have to memorize the manual because I could look at a problem, break it down in the ways that people who didn't have that education didn't have the skill set for. And that's the problem, I think, is part of it, is also these invisible skills. That's what we really should be educating for. Those are really hard to measure. And I was talking
If
to
I
somebody.
might,
Yeah, go ahead.
if I jump in really quick here, I recall a number of years ago, and I may even still have the article in my presence. I actually read an article, old style paper, from Harvard Business Review.
Yeah.
And they did research and surveys on what is the best training to prepare people for executive leadership.
Hmm.
And they determined that it was not a business degree, a management degree, an organizational theory degree. Actually, it was the arts and humanities,
Yeah,
because of all the human skills. And so, I mean, if you're going to sell jobs in leadership training, the humanities are crucial. Um,
absolutely. Yeah.
unless, of course, you wish to crush the entire Enlightenment project of the humanities, which is a part of a political agenda. But back to really quickly to the Florida issue and the scanning of syllabi and such. We have a brand new colleague full time at CSU East Bay in the public administration program, and he left a university in Southern Florida to come to the Bay Area. And I joked with him, so you're a refugee from Florida? And he says, whatever you've heard about Florida, it's worse. And they are, in fact, scanning syllabi. They are right down to that level. And they do intend, and quite frankly, part of my scan of the political ideology that's coming in, there are two coalitions. There's the libertarian tech bros, and there is the Christian nationalist crowd, the populist, and Musk represents the tech bros, and Bannon represents the populists. And among the populists is the Christian nationalist, and they are seeking to expunge DEI because they do, in fact, want to roll back the 20th century to the age of William McKinley and the same profile of civil rights and social mores of the late 1890s, which means returning to the ascendancy of white males. Women getting the vote was a mistake. Minorities need to know their place. Gay people need to go back into the closet. This is the anti-DEI campaign, which is feeding the Christian nationalist agenda. And on top of it, you've got Hillsdale College, which is the intellectual center of the Christian right, creating curriculum for the nation, and their curriculum has been approved for public schools in Tennessee and Florida. And the idea is that the United States is great, always has been great. It's a Christian nation. It always should be a Christian nation. And these are our values, and they don't include anything that's included in DEI. And that's what we're seeing happening here. And we need we need a counterattack to that. And so, yeah, it's all there. Bryan, I know that you wanted to jump in there for a moment. I know Mark's just waiting.
Well, I was just going to poke at Tom as I like to do, I think that going against the Enlightenment project is definitely part of, although that in some ways overstates the philosophical underpinnings as such exist. And I would just keep in mind that some of the humanities don't believe in the Enlightenment project anymore as well, and haven't since the 1960s. But I do think I would disagree with Tom, though. I mean, this is an ancient argument. This goes back, to the 1700s. Is to what extent is higher education a job training program? And the one thing I would add is that since we decided to massively inflate the student debt balloon during the 1990s, for the average student being told that you're going to graduate with a median amount of debt around $29,000, a good job would be a really good thing to have at the end of that. And we've seen all the polls, pushing that way, and the polls in general are pretty unfavorable to higher ed. Attitudes have been sliding in all kinds of directions. People, like with Congress, people are very against higher ed in general, but they don't hate their locals so much, but they're very skeptical. And this is partially marked by partisan differences with Republicans and conservatives, especially, anti-higher education. But it's also occurring across independents and Democrats as well, just not as much. It's a very, very challenging time.
And I mean, I think the more general point I was trying to make is education is a public good versus a private good, and this idea that if as a job training program.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I'm very sympathetic to that. And
Yeah.
Chris Neufeld makes this argument. John Warner has a book about this. He writes about it a lot. And the problem is there's zero appetite for it.
I know.
The consensus is against that. And
Yeah.
state governments have priorities that beat public higher ed to the ground every single time. I mean, Medicare and Medicaid, for example, just loom really super large. Many American states, not Texas, but many other American states, are aging rapidly, which means that, causes for seniors have a whole bunch of precedents. And some states, including Illinois and California, saw some interesting politics trying to play K through 12 off of higher ed, and K through 12 usually wins in those cases. So I think right now to call for a return to public, a public spirited higher ed is public good is fantasy right now. But the one thing that Robert and I can track is to what extent reactions are happening. So, we've got right now, as we record this, Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are going across the country, barnstorming against oligarchs. We're seeing stories of town hall meetings where people are outraged, even in deep red counties, and they're hollering about protecting Social Security from their representatives. I was just at a town hall meeting here in Virginia last night, and people were seething. So it may be that we're on the cusp of a giant, public wave, but I think things have been pushed so far to the neoliberal extreme that I think a major stride forward would be something like early 1980s level. Man, I'm in a grim mood. Mark, help me out. Get me out of this.
Oh, I don't know
Oh,
if
you
I
asked
can
the
help,
wrong
Bryan.
person for that help.
So I'm not an academic. I took a different path, and so I have a different point of view. Um, so many things to reply to. So I'll start here, and we'll see how far back in the comments I can get before I run out of steam. One of the things I learned in Robert's class at Alameda Community College in a poli-sci class to support student leaders and student government was that the binary view of politics, or the duopoly, as some people call it, is a outdated way of looking at things. And so he used a text from his alma mater, Ball and Dagger, about ideology, and he taught us that for every position or for every group, or however you want to look at it, to facet your view of politics, for every instance that you look at, there are at least 3 points of view. There's the liberal, and he's talking more classical liberal, I imagine. Then there's the conservative, but the part that's always left out in these discussions, in Ball and Dagger's view, is the radical. And they mean it in the more historic sense of the root of these, where especially social movements come from below, the radical component. And so I've been using that now for more than a decade. Every time a conversation comes up, I always like to point out, well, there is the radical point of view, or more points of view. I mean, people don't like the word radical, so more points of view. So the discussion so far is hinged around Team Red and Team Blue. And when Team Red now is in ascendancy, Team Blue is playing defense and trying to figure out what to do. And it won't be long, and Team Blue will be in ascendancy, and then Team Red will be on defense and figuring out what to do. As someone who started taking college classes 55 years ago while I was in high school, I remember a time before the Department of Education. And I have to say that education, in the last 5 years, I've spent more time looking at this field, looking at digital humanities and those things, not working, being semi-retired or retired, unemployable, whatever I am. One of the things I've realized is that the education system, and I'm talking about in California, which was a progressive education system in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, apparently a world leader with this integrated system of K-12 feeding into community colleges, which they were a leader in creating those, and then the state universities, or the land grant colleges as they would be in other states, and then the University of California as internationally recognized R1 institutions. Supposedly that was one of the best systems in the world. But I've realized, looking back, that it has failed me at every step of the way. Now, maybe I'm just a loser, but I meet a lot of people and have a lot of discussions about education, and our system is failing a lot of people. And so I'll point to returning as a middle-aged student to a community college on the suggestion of our new African-American president, Obama, who said, you workers that have been displaced by the financial crisis, while he was bailing out the banksters and the financial institutions, he was telling us workers to go back to school and retrain. So I had run out of unemployment. And because that's limited, you pay in decade after decade after decade. But when you need it, they kick you out. They try to kick you out after a year. And if you fight, like I did, you can stretch it out a couple of years, but then it ends. And so I went back to school. And that experience was the worst experience of my life, as I like to say. So there we are.
Except for me.
Except for, well, there are exceptions.
Yes.
There are good teachers and there were good administrators, and I can tell those stories too. But the overall experience was not good, stretched out for more years than it should have, and caused a lot of harm to me and other people, and which is why I got involved in student organizing. And we fixed the financial aid system, which is probably one of the best projects I've been involved in my life, and I've been involved in some great projects. So this discourse that I hear now is, oh, this is a great system. We have to protect it. It's the best in the world, and these other people are evil and trying to destroy it. I'm like, well, we already survived 4 years of Trump, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to survive the next 4 years. And he's going to do some damage, but all presidents do damage. The fact that the Department of Education is being looked at doesn't hurt my feelings. Now, the people that are looking at it are probably not competent to do that. But this idea of transparency doesn't hurt my feelings, especially in state institutions. I have the same position on pedagogy and administration of a state institution that I have in administering research grants to state institutions. There should be transparency. So I have a consistent position on that. Now, of course, anything can be weaponized. And, so we have to deal with that. That's the political issue. But the idea that we're looking at this is in general is okay. I don't like the administration. I would never vote for it. I don't support it. I've been yelling about Trump long before he ran for president as a criminal and a money launderer, but that's a separate issue. And so there was at least one other point. And so I had a lifelong plan. I started college and high school, and I decided it wasn't for me. I was a first generation. I went to a community college out of I love to say I went to one of the worst high schools in the US because a decade after I left, Ronald Reagan showed up and said, this is the most improved high school in America. Now, he was just poking Richard Nixon in the eye because he came to Nixon's hometown and said that. But to be the most improved school in America, you have to be pretty low. There has to be some headroom there. So I've always said that. And it wasn't a very good school, although it was brand new. It was new and shiny. But at that point, I set a plan I wanted to be a craftsman. Based on my family experience and what in college, I learned how to blow glass, and I decided to be a craftsman. But my plan was always to keep an eye on the standards of the California university system, what you needed to go to the University of California. I completed all those classes over 3 decades, night classes, whatever. I always kept my eye on that. And in the back of my mind, I knew that it would always be free. And so when I retired, I intended to retire early. When I retired, I was ready to apply to the University of California. I had all the prerequisite courses, and I could afford it, I thought. But that's not how things worked out. So I just have to say I'm going to watch this. Again, growing up in Nixon's hometown, I've been watching politics since I was a child, and I will watch this political theater play out and continue to work in alternative education and work in third spaces in civic society rather than in the institutional education. So that's my take on it. It's a little different.
Let me jump in here. This conversation, this is something that's supposed to happen when people get together and play with ideas, as opposed to defending beliefs that they believe in. So I'm sitting here actually experiencing some internal uh, dramatic dialectical agon. Uh, um, so the one of the central pieces of Project 2025 is deconstructing the administrative state. And what do they mean by that? They mean the regulatory rules of all the agencies at the federal level and how they, from their perspective, intrude upon the life of Americans in every sector of society. And then I'm listening to, we've talked about the price of education going up and what caused it. And and we talked about the quality of education, and my own partner teaches in K through 12 and comes home and complains about pointless tests that are being given that are meeting federal standards. And my own experience of accreditation studies for colleges and the whole student learning outcomes movement. Um, and and if you had told me when I was in graduate school that all of my major, 90% of my major professional arguments would be about research methods, I would have laughed at you. But in fact, all the stupidity that goes into how we measure, assess and measure student learning and outcomes and et cetera. And it's like I sit in horror at all the money that we have spent to meet these intrusions upon education by the if and this is where I'm cringing, the administrative state. All these regulations that accompany accreditation, each one of their standards almost certainly requires a new administrator to be hired to and new reports to be filled out. And I remember there was easily a 3-year period of time when we were trying to take our college in a brand new direction. We had a president who we believed in, end up being kind of a disappointment. But the fact was, administrators were almost not present for 3 straight years because they were spending so much time writing reports. And so there's the measurement paradox, I believe it's called, the evaluation paradox. You spend so much time writing reports, evaluating what you're doing, that you literally don't have time left to do what it is you say you're measuring and assessing. And then I have literally written reports where, like on page 20, I'll put a footnote in saying, please, if you're reading this at this stage, would you please call me, and put my phone number right there. And nobody's ever called because I know nobody's going to read these things. And so the number of hours and administrators spent following these intrusive regulations that actually don't measure anything accurately. And I think to myself, if the administrative state relative to education were in fact to disappear tomorrow, and in fact they were somehow able to handle the funds for disabled students and student loans, et cetera, with other departments, and all of a sudden we didn't have to evaluate all those things again, and we could actually lay off a lot of administrators that we don't need because we're not measuring those things. I'm thinking to myself, there's a part of their agenda that I'm kind of feeling good about at this exact moment, and I
Oh,
feel
I'm glad I'd
icky.
have this recorded.
Oh dear God, I know. But the fact is the intrusiveness of stupid regulations. Uh, and and the implementation was done so poorly, speaking as a public administrator, that if they did, in fact, to some extent, this is hurting again, burn down the edifice of the educational world that's been built since the 1970s, and we were able to survive it and come out of it Phoenix-like, providing civilization itself doesn't collapse. Um, Maybe this could be a good thing. And I don't like saying anything I've just said for the past 5 minutes because, and it's all your fault. If I hadn't come into this conversation today, maybe I'd stay safe back there. But there's a lot of shit coming our way. But perhaps it's time to consider the possibility that maybe some of it is good. How they're doing it with a hatchet, not sure I like that, but you know, but here it is. So, thoughts? Mark's enjoying that.
I'm reminded of the Rush song, "The Trees." Where the small trees complained about the big trees, and so
Oh,
they to cut down the whole forest, and now everybody's equal. Of course, Rush is Neil Peart is a fan of Ayn Rand, so, but yeah.
yeah.
So I'm just
Who is big in Project 2025? She
yeah,
really is.
yeah, that's why I brought it up. But this idea that you clear cut the whole forest and then
Yeah.
see what's left. Um, yeah, I mean, yeah, I understand that frustration and the slow accretion of bureaucracy. As political scientists, you and I both know this, Robert, is it's kind of a fact of existence with that.
Hmm.
Um, and yes, there does need to be a lot less. It's not a either or situation. There does need to be a lot less reflexive protectionism of bureaucracy as a concept, because bureaucracy is not bureaucrats, and in many cases, bureaucrats are very well intentioned, and they're just
Yes.
trying to figure out what to do with the people involved in this system are often very dedicated, and of course, they're the
Hmm.
victims right now.
Yes.
They are dedicated and sacrificing, and this myth of the bureaucrat who's only in it because he can't get a better job is, kind of BS anyway
Horrific.
as well. So, um, but yeah, I mean, I think so. Let me pivot us a little bit because we've been talking about this for a while, and I don't think we're going to solve education
Well, before
and
you do that, let's let Bryan get a rejoinder here and then we'll pivot.
well, okay.
Oh gosh, you're just Mark,
Way to
you're
put him on
pulling
the
Tom and I
spot.
off of each other. Um, well, I think one of the things that concerns me that we haven't mentioned so far is that the Trump administration is horrible for climate action, both in
Hmm.
general. I'm learning this week the Trump administration is trying to increase coal burning. Not to mention that's, as Bill McKibben puts it, strong arming other countries into buying more natural gas and oil from the U.S. But this is really putting the kibosh on what little climate action there was in higher
Yes.
education. I was talking to a bunch of campus architects this week and campus planners, uh, both working within colleges as well as serving colleges, and they were saying that it's just a nightmare for them right now because all their costs are going up. It's
Hmm.
an open question about which projects that are already underway are going to be allowed to keep going and so on. Uh, I mean, the U.S. is only one part of the global emissions picture, although
But it's a
we
big part.
it's a big part. Well, in terms of emissions, we're a minority. In terms of historical emissions, we're pretty high.
Yes.
But we
Yeah.
have a lot of influence, and we can help make, international agreements happen. And also, we provide a model for the for methane emissions, because of our heavy meat-based diet, that a lot of countries aspire to. And I think this is just straight up one of the horrors of the Trump administration.
Yeah.
3.75 years from now or so, the world will be a worse place flat out. And what I'm hoping is that the horror that we confront with this will inspire more action, and it may be insurgent climate action. So perhaps, Robert, in a kind of, if you'll forgive me, in a kind of dialectical way, that may be what we're seeing, is that the omni shambles, as the British put it, of Trump will elicit a lot of energy and creativity in the opposition that the Biden administration wasn't able to tap, and that Harris certainly wasn't able to mobilize. So,
Unfortunately. Yeah.
Well, I
so
think
that's
that's a,
that's
So
I
my
see
before
that
my,
theme
my
over
silver
and
lining.
over again that there's, I will call it the boomerang effect. And in the context of climate change and education and democracy, this thinking of, that this is going to generate a reaction that's going to propel things forward as a reaction to it. Um, I hope you're right, and I hope everybody who thinks these things is right. I'm not as sanguine about it as I was fairly recently because I've actually been a proponent of this, but I've been thinking really hard about The underlying things that are driving this are not just Trump and the yes, he's controlling the narrative, and the elites can have a huge effect on putting their thumb on the scales by controlling the narrative in certain directions on all of these subjects. But there is that underlying resistance to change in general, which pervades the educational system, but also pervades American society when it comes to anything having to do with uh, changes in lifestyle. At the same
And
time,
this is where I've become more hopeful,
mhm,
oddly. I'm working with another group that is interested in education, not organized, not institutional education, but working class education, third space education, whatever you want to call it.
mhm.
Um, and I've been pointing out to them that, again, this problem with binary thinking, um, because it's our culture, so it just comes out of our mouth. I do it too. I mean, it just comes out of your mouth, whether
It's
you like it
baked
or
into
not.
our political system. I mean,
Yeah,
first
it's
past the
exactly.
post tends to generate two
Yeah,
poles because you
But what
have to
I've been
unite around a pole
promoting,
to win.
right.
yeah, but what I've been promoting is, um, based on the current political climate, um, I've watched my friends, I'm looking at you, Robert, get excited about Bernie Sanders twice
Yeah.
and get burned both times. And I've watched other friends who are not here get excited about Trump and felt burned the first time. And I'm pretty sure they're going to feel burned the second time, especially all the people who thought he was the peace candidate. Once he draws Iran out to support Yemen, it's going to get interesting. I'll just stop because we're not talking about that. So what I've been promoting, and I've been saying this long before I met Robert, as a worker, I always pointed out to my friends two things. Back to the energy, two things is nobody ever brings up the United States military when they talk about energy. It just never comes up in the conversation. Well, that's the biggest user of energy in the world is the US military, and it's completely unregulated. If they want to burn 10,000 gallons of jet fuel per hour or whatever, just playing around, they do. There's no oversight. Separate issue, but I just have to bring that up. Every time climate change and all that comes up, nobody ever says, well, what about the US military? Let's cut that in half, which I've been saying since I was a kid.
It's
That's
because
not the issue here.
people do talk about
Um,
the climate movement, and I'd be happy to, but if that's going to be off the table, I won't dive in.
Well, we're trying. I know Tom really wants to pivot to AI, and we're halfway there. So, um, but what
Well,
I wanted to point out was I've been saying to this other group, okay, so we have the disaffected blue team, and we have the disaffected of the red team, and what I've been pointing out for decades is the majority of eligible U.S. voters. Of course, that doesn't include the formerly incarcerated and some other people, so that could easily be expanded. But the current group of eligible US voters, the majority of them don't vote. Now, I'm not talking about registered voters, I'm talking about eligible voters. You have to be clear. Um, and so if we add together the people that don't vote with the disaffected blue team and the disaffected red team, we're talking about a clear majority. If we can communicate something hopeful like, let's fix the housing problem or let's fix the debt problem, something that everybody agrees is a problem. The healthcare problem, I've always been a proponent of the healthcare should be the driving uh, whatever issue. But I can't. I haven't got traction yet. But I'm seeing the hopeful part is I'm seeing once the red team gets disaffected again, there's this huge swath of the United States of America. We're talking about this country, a huge swath of people that somebody could get a message across to them. So that's what I'm hopeful about. But I know Tom wants to pivot to AI, and
no, I don't.
so
I, if AI comes out of this, that's fine. But I want to talk about um, the disconnect between the speed of technology and our institution's ability to react to it, and how that colors all of this. I think that one of the reasons that education has been struggling uh, to, again, with that value proposition, however you want to define it, is that education has been very slow to adapt to the new realities of technology. I mean, you can see it most clearly, I think, and Robert, you can either confirm me or tell me I'm full of crap, but my experience has been in both the college and K-12 environments that I work in, that if you do bring up the question of AI, at best you're going to be confronted with indifference or more, or even more likely, outright hostility, because they view it as an attack on the system, and the system is more important than the process. And that gets back to the whole bureaucratic thing, because the education itself is a bureaucratic mechanism for processing students, and it has very little to do with the actual learning.
I see
Uh,
sausages.
yeah, exactly. It's a sausage factory. And But I think this is exacerbated. The system was designed around this the metaphors of paper, your file folder that you dearly want to bring to class and teach your class with. But paper dictates a certain kind of teaching. The
Yep.
logistics of teaching is challenging, and it also makes it people resistant to change. I mean, as an adjunct, I'm not that interested in spending weeks reinventing my course, although there's a part of me that says I need to do some serious rejiggering right now, because of the fact that AI is really changing the capabilities of AI are changing what I can do in class. I feel like I'm doing a disservice to my students when I don't incorporate that effectively. But I know I'm already, just with the limited amount that I do, light years ahead of most of my colleagues. And I hear, oh, AI is awful and all this sort of thing. We want to ban it and all this stuff. And so, but I mean, I'm just talking about that general techno um, reactionism. And you can see it the news today. Apparently, there's a new bipartisan movement to ban to get rid of Section 230 and again. And
Section 230, what's that again?
the with of the God, help me out, Brian, here, brain fart. It's the with
Communications Decency Act.
CDA, yeah,
Um,
Communications Decency Act, yeah,
And Section 230 is the one which is the safe harbor section, so that
yeah.
Facebook or YouTube cannot be prosecuted for content that they carry on them. So if you send me a death threat, courts can go after you, or I can sue you for civil rights violations, but we can't sue the email providers for doing so.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And it's
Uh,
kind of
I'm sorry, not the CDA, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act.
thank you. I thought it was the
There you
DMCA.
go.
Yeah, yeah, right. It's been referred. There's a book. I have a book that's called what is it? The 23 Words That Made the Internet, or something like that. It's relatively short. Ron Wyden did it, and he's one of the few senators who actually can spell technology. Um, but you see this
Along with Al
reactionism.
Gore.
Yeah. Mm. Yeah, that's right. Invented the internet. You can see this reactionary, though, this anti-social media from both sides of the aisle. You can see, the Congress is hopelessly out of touch with this. And you can see all of these things coming together as not only just an anti-enlightenment movement, but also an anti-technology movement, because technology
Hmm.
is inherently disruptive. And that's one way in which I think that, politically speaking, the education establishment's actually on the same side in many ways, as the administration, because they see the fact that you can, to go that third way, as Mark likes to put it. You can use technology, open courseware, and all this other stuff. The only thing at that point you're losing out on is the accreditation and the certification. And they see that as a real threat. I see, and people are like, well, why am I spending $1 bazillion to go to these schools when I can learn most of this stuff on my own, and so on and so forth. Now, that hasn't really gelled into the coherent movement that I think a lot of people expected 10 years ago with the MOOCs, and going back further than that with other things. But I do think that there's still this disconnect between the speed that the world is moving and the speed that our institutions are able to adapt to that movement. And I see that within education, I see that within government, I see that within the workforce and business as well, because businesses aren't using this sort of stuff effectively. And yeah, you can point to AI right now because it's the latest thing, but I know businesses who are still struggling with this Google thing, or computers and whatever. I was just talking to my cousin who works for a company that is a manufacturing company. They make fasteners, and he was saying, yeah, there was a big thing. We just finally converted off of DOS, and you go to Home Depot and you see their systems that are still running on DOS and stuff. So you think,
And COBOL.
COBOL, yeah, exactly. I mean, and by the way, that's another one of those administrative bottlenecks. Oh God, we can't redo the student financial aid system because it's written in Fortran or whatever. What was it? Fortran, wasn't it?
No, it's written in COBOL.
It's COBOL. Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
And there's no one who knows how to write that anymore.
Oh yeah, I actually do
So,
tell my students as asides that if you actually want a job, become a COBOL programmer, and you'll get a job because some of these ancient infrastructures, and nobody wants to touch them, and
yeah.
nobody wants to spend the money to develop a new one. And it's like, and I don't know. I find myself now wondering if the air traffic control system is in COBOL, and
Ooh, I don't just had a thought on that. I don't know the answer to that, but I don't know if I want to know the answer to that.
So I'm going to encourage Bryan again to jump in. Bryan's been a little reticent lately. I don't know why.
He's just prudent.
Oh, that's it. Well, he's the one with the job at the real
ah,
higher ed
yeah.
institution. Maybe that's it. I don't know. I don't think
No,
so.
no, that's not it. I just
I
I
know.
prefer to listen. I prefer to I mean, I don't know Robert, and I'm really delighted to get to hear what he thinks. And Tom gets to I get to abuse him all day long. And Mark, you so far have escaped, but I also prefer to listen to you as well. Um, I mean, I think, I mean, there's so much of what we're talking about here. I think the higher education right now has been very conservative. I don't mean ideologically, but I mean institutionally,
Mhm.
for
Hmm.
and some of this is for good stuff. I mean, you think it's about protecting the great achievements of human intellectual endeavor and making them available for students, and expanding those achievements through research. And then there are other reasons which are perhaps not so laudable. We could think of some of the downsides of tenure protections. We could think of Tom mentioned the adjunctification of the professoriate, and adjuncts have zero support, zero incentive to do just about anything besides teach classes that get high grades.
That's
And
true.
that's the largest proportion of the professoriate right now. Um, I think though that the past 5 years have really clobbered higher ed in some new additional ways. So we haven't recovered from COVID. I mean, we switched classes online, which for a lot of people was a brand new thing. We also suffered some degree of injury and death along with long COVID, for which, by the way, we have no statistics on. We have no reliable data about just how many students, faculty, and staff were sickened or killed by COVID, which is unexcusable, but there it is. We've also had, depending on who you are in which part of academia, we've had massive enrollment declines. So, Robert, of
Yes.
course, community colleges suffer this until they figure out dual enrollment. And the humanities and the non-quantitatively intensive social sciences have been suffering enrollment declines. Different institutions in general have been suffering from all kinds of economic fragility for various reasons. And then politically, people may be anxious about undocumented students as well as staff and faculty. They may be anxious about sexual minorities. They may be really exercised about anti-racism. A handful of us are excited about climate change. And now the Trump administration seems to be just jumping on higher education with both boats on. And all of that puts us in a defensive crouch. It puts us in we've got to protect what we've got. We kind of turn turtle and we try to just hope everything can bounce off of our back. This is not conducive to innovation. This is not conducive to creative thinking. So it's making that kind of change, I think, even harder. But it may be that the sheer amount of chaos that's involved may allow for some interesting ideas and some interesting practices to percolate up.
The great fear, um, which actually is a realistic fear about AI, is it could fairly quickly come to replace knowledge workers. I know there's been some experimentation in how effective is AI at doing psychotherapy. And what the one of the dirty secrets of psychotherapy, it's actually a lovely secret, to tell you the truth. But uh, so I don't, 30 years of effectiveness evaluation of psychotherapeutic schools of intervention has demonstrated that the school of psychotherapeutic intervention that is the therapist comes from has very little impact on the outcomes of therapy for the client. And so what is it that has outcomes for the therapy on the client? It's Carl Rogers. The research is clear that if, the client trusts that the therapist is competent, if the client feels safe, unjudged, feels listened to, and feels like this person is actually present there for them, um, that this is what makes therapy effective. The interesting little variation is the client needs to feel the therapist is competent. Part of a therapist being perceived as competent is the therapist exudes competence, or confidence and competence. And one of the number one things that helps a therapist feel confident in their competence is their school of thought. So the school of thought strictly for the therapist, not for the client. Now, what does that mean for AI? It means that if you can, in fact, program AI to ask empathetic questions, prompt for more information, and only ask questions. Theoretically, there's been experiments done that clients experience an AI generator as, wow, that was very helpful. And I can see it because the simplicity of psychotherapy is this core secret sauce, as you were. And I look at these huge places like my alma mater, Arizona State University, is a worldwide competitor. I cringe when I see Grand Canyon University also jumping in. And I remember thinking this about MOOCs. If you can teach 40,000 students at a time, uh, what does that do to the little community college in a small town in Texas, Tom? And
Yes,
but
it's not exactly a small town, but I'll grant you
okay,
that.
and
But
and then I know that one of the things that bothered me about MOOCs is they will take a great professor and use their lectures. And then what happens to now we're reusing? I mean, you could have the same great professor lecturing on fill in the blank, and 30 years later, that lecture is still valid in some subjects. But in all that time, there's no new professors. There's no new. Why would anyone study to?
well, I
Those
mean,
are
the
all.
idea is, I would think you would be refreshing that. I want to make a quick point relating to your psychotherapy point. You could make exactly the same argument when it comes to good teaching, because
Oh yeah.
I mean, the reality is that people teach themselves, and we're just there to help them.
Yeah, I will tell
And
you that I use my psychotherapeutic techniques in teaching, and
yeah,
that's what works.
yeah, exactly. And um, so in relationship to MOOCs, I mean, to me, the perfect model for that sort of thing was Britain's Open University, where essentially it was a MOOC. You had centrally created
Hmm.
material, which by the way doesn't have to be static. You can create, redo it, and in some ways it makes it easier to make it unstatic because you divide the load and you say, okay, well, we're gonna teach a course on government, and you're the expert on Congress, so you're going to talk about Congress, and you're the expert on the presidency, and you're going to talk, and it's your responsibility to keep that fresh and so on, right? But the key element that the Open University had, which American MOOCs did not, and in some ways which are lacking at the community college level, is they had these small study groups that were
Yes,
led by
yes,
facilitators,
yes.
which were essentially grad student type or that level,
Hmm.
And those were all over the country. And so they could broadcast that, and then the groups would get together and they'd work on the assignments and they'd
Yep.
talk to each other and pull each other through the process. And there's an awful lot of data that shows that that's the most effective way to learn.
Are you
Is
familiar with study circles in Sweden?
Yeah, I'm thinking about situated learning as well.
Hmm. Yeah.
But this idea that, and that's the problem with education in general as a system, is because its entire focus since the 19th century has been to scale. And
Yeah.
we want to make more people literate, we want to make more people educated, et cetera. And that started with K-12 and then
Hmm.
migrated up to the higher end after World War II, higher ed, and the GI Bill, and getting as many people, everybody should go to college, blah, blah, blah. But for what end? That's the problem, is that nobody's ever really, nobody ever came up with that. I'm not going to argue that the massification did not provide for huge benefits to the country over the last 50 years in terms of the sheer number and the capabilities of the American citizenry. But it's that's tailing off now. I don't think we've had as a percentage of population. Again, Bryan, you're the one who follows this data, but I don't think as a percentage of population we're pushing as many people through college, even though the absolute numbers may be going up slightly, plateauing, however, at a given time. And as you say, they're in the, I mean, you've been predicting for a decade, they're going to decline, and they're already starting to do that.
No,
Um,
they declined straight from about 2012 to last fall, and
yeah,
the rebound is entirely consisting of a dual enrollment in community colleges.
which
Um,
is basically forcing the community colleges to do the high school's job.
Yes.
yeah, yeah, it's
I
quite a
I
privilege.
have taught dual enrollment, and
And
I
I
you
have
do.
too. All,
Yeah, it's a I have to tell you, it's talk about work getting
well,
um
the biggest
yeah.
problem I have with it is that it does exemplify just how much wasted time there is in K-12 as
Well,
well.
that's true.
We should be pushing people harder earlier, and there's no reason the level at which I teach at a freshman sophomore level in college. Honestly, I should be teaching that in ninth grade high school. Is that, I mean, at that level, to the,
Can
the
you
level of work I'm expecting from my students.
can you tell us just a bit more about how you do that? How you do dual enrollment teaching when you're teaching at a community college? What are some of the challenges?
What there's okay. So, I mean, honestly, the I don't teach any differently my dual credit courses as I do in my K my senior level or regular courses. Okay, the big differences are administrative the um and the fact that the parents are more likely to interject themselves into the conversation and the complications that ensue from that. Um, Other things are just the college environment being out of sync with the high school environment. If you're teaching on a high school campus, the idea of shutting down your class for a day because there's a pep rally,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
weird bell schedules and all this sort of stuff, it's just the flow of the class gets disrupted in ways that are can be aggravating. But in terms of the material and the expectations around it, I teach it exactly the same way as I would in my junior senior class. But I mean, the adult or whatever community college class, and by the way, high school kids in my institution, high school kids can come and take dual credit courses on the college campus that are not offered at their high school as well. So I get people in the summer who are dual credit students who are just taking the class in a regular community college classroom, and they get the dual credit for it. It just has to be part of the allowed course list kind of thing.
This is
But yeah,
this is an important place for that. I've had different experiences, but you just reminded me of some variations of my experiences. So on our campus, we have the Alameda Science and Technology Institute, which is a former Gates Early College high school on our campus. It's a charter school within the Alameda Unified School District. And those students have full access to college courses if they want to come onto our campus fully and take a class and or join a
No,
Zoom
those I
class.
think
So
work really well. Those
yes.
are the gold standard in my opinion. Is the
So
is
what?
the early
Yes.
college things.
So what I have found, yes, yes, yes. What I have found is the high school students who come into a college class to take it on their own accord are sometimes the best, some of the best students I have. On the other side of the equation, when I'm teaching a college course to high school students to which the high school students were assigned,
Mm-hmm.
there's a serious chunk of them who simply are not even remotely interested or ready and or ready. So you ask, what are the
Mm-hmm.
differences? Now, two things. I have taught high school in person, and I have taught high school Zoom. When I teach high school in person, I'm in the room and facilitating. And remember, I've got training as a group therapist with severely emotionally handicapped children. So I go in armed to actually treat it like a psychotherapy environment with adolescents. And I have had to do so. The difference is there is classroom management that is almost absent completely in the community college. And I find that drawing students out, I have to actually call on them and 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 so you have this classroom management problem, which is always fascinating, because they don't know how to sit still in a classic classroom. Now, you could argue that maybe we need to have alternative learning environments. That's true, uh, and and when I teach Zoom, it doesn't work unless there is a staffer in the room while I'm on Zoom with them, and getting them to turn their cameras on. Uh, the students who don't want to talk, but they'll type in the chat, and so what I do have to do is I have to literally go around and call people. And what I'll do is I'll be kind of lecturing, and then what I will do is say, look, in about 3 minutes, I'm going to be going around asking you for questions. So maybe you should formulate a question now over the next 3 minutes. And then I'll start going around. And it's very highly structured and disciplined, which I do not do with my college classes.
Mm-hmm.
And furthermore, I find that they are not able to do the work that I give. So my political theory class, what I would offer in there is quite rigorous, I've been told. And for the high school classes, I had to simplify it. I just had to. And I would literally chopped out assignments and then I have to create uh extra credit assignments for them to catch up because they've missed so many assignments and
Mm-hmm.
on it goes. And so there's a nightmare facility there. But but now you got me thinking about my own experiences. So I was in Catholic K through th I was in Catholic school from first to sixth grade. Then I was in public school seventh and eighth, and then had a summer at a military school in Georgia. That's an entire story in and of itself. And then I spent 2 years at a public high school, and then I spent my last 2 years at a college military preparatory academy in Southern California. And I go back and forth between what was wrong with my public education. They were willing to let me get away with crap that would have left me completely unable to function in college. And the 2 years at military school prepared me. The only problem for military school was this. They disciplined you to be in your rooms 5 nights a week, and they actually came around and watched you. If your windows had to be open and if you weren't at your desk, they would ask what's going on, etc. So when I got to Arizona State University, nobody was disciplining me. And it took me literally 7 years to finish my AA degree because I could not self-discipline. But somewhere in those 7 years, I became a little bit more And the day finally arrived when I realized the university system wasn't going to change to make me happy. And I started studying in coffee houses, and the rest is history. I disciplined myself, but these
Yeah.
kids don't have discipline.
And
And
I have two handicaps in that area. One was I grew up around colleges, universities because my father was a professor. And the other one was that he also gave me the best advice in the world when I graduated high school. He said, go work for a couple of years. And so I worked full time for 2 years before I went off to college.
yeah.
And that it wasn't that I wasn't academically ready. I was a good student. It was
Hmm.
that, but it taught me how to show up for work at 8 o'clock in the morning and go home at
Ah,
5
yeah,
and
yeah.
I didn't make much money. It also showed me what it was like to work for minimum wage when you were 35 years old because I looked at some of my guys, the guys I sold cameras, some of the guys around me who were
I sold
35 years old.
cameras.
Okay.
Good God. At Sears.
O- Okay,
So,
so
but
we're
the point
wandering far afield
yeah,
here,
no, but the point, the simple,
and we're running out of time.
yeah, the short
Oh,
point here is that I did want to interject that, I look at teaching with Zoom as an opportunity to introduce electronic active learning exercises. I
yes.
use concept mapping a lot. Use AIs more recently as a way of creating an active learning environment where I literally, whether they're talking or not, they're having to interact with what's going on. Like, one of the things I've been doing with AI recently was one of the big challenges in my class is getting my students to figure out what the hell the question's about. And I never sometimes I have trouble understanding figuring out whether they understand that until they turn in the wrong assignment because they don't understand the question. So what I've been doing with AI is I ask them to ask the chatbot what they think the question is and then have it list off a response to that. And I say post in a discussion tab on in Canvas, post it, and we do this live in class. Post the question you asked, and then post what ChatGPT tells you, and then we go through this live in class. And I say,
Hmm.
okay, this is where you led ChatGPT astray, and this is where ChatGPT is leading you
You
astray,
astray.
and use it as a way of critically going through it and getting them to go understand. And it gives them a much deeper understanding of the kind of work that they need to do, but also it shows them the limitations of what ChatGPT will do for them in terms
Hmm.
of a substitute for their work. And so it teaches them about AI, it teaches them, but it also gives me a modality that wasn't available to me before. Yeah, I could have them write a draft paper, but then have to go through that and go back. And the logistics behind that is very time consuming. And it doesn't work really well because they don't read the comments. And so this way it's a very live and interactive experience. I do feel like I have to teach my freshman level college kids as if they're ninth graders in high school because they don't have
Ah,
the reading skills,
yeah, yeah,
they
yeah.
don't have the thinking skills because they've not been forced to do that. And these, remember, in most cases, are the ones who are failed by the system, who did not
Yes.
get into the top tier schools for whatever reason, maybe didn't want to, but
Hmm.
didn't
Hmm.
apply themselves because they didn't see the point to school and so on and so forth. Whatever, there's a long laundry list of reasons why they wind up in my class in community college, but most of them have to do with the fact that they really didn't learn anything in high school, and high school didn't force them to learn anything. They forced them to learn just enough to get by. And these are the systems, and I don't want to just pick on higher ed because K-12 is the root of the problem there too, with the standardized testing and all of that, and this idea of, I talk about this dichotomy between creativity and conformity when it comes to education, and that we need to be teaching for creativity in an AI world because conformity is going to get swamped by the AIs because it's much easier to replicate conformity than it is to replicate creativity. And if you
This
use
is where
AI
I
to
want to.
facilitate your creativity, then you can grow and go above that. So yeah,
This is where I wanted us to land in this conversation. And
yeah.
Bryan wants to go cook dinner, but we're gonna see how long we can keep him here before he just turns off his camera and walks away. Um,
No, 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 no. We're not going to do that.
so in our last two conversations, we got to talk to Ruben Puentedura about AI and the way he's using it. And then we got to talk to Stephen Downs, one of the co-creators of the massive open online course, the MOOC. And so I'm sort of hearing those conversations background. Robert, you can go and listen to those. what I wanted to bring us to in this conversation is how AI in particular, but technology in general, is bringing us to this point, and then with earlier the political situation. So all of these things to me are creating an environment where, based on Rubin's model, the SAMR model, which I use, is we're have an opportunity to redefine higher education. And so what I wanted to ask you college professors is how this has led you to, I know in the day-to-day, it's leading you to different methods of assessment because it's so easy to generate text now or images for a class that requires images. What you're thinking about and how this is leading you to change in your day-to-day assignments, and then how you're thinking about how we can change higher education to both absorb or use these technologies and have meaningful assignments that do ask the students to do the thinking and be creative, and actually become educated while they're with us. So let's start with Bryan, and then if he ducks out, that's fine.
I was just being crushed by one of the cats, so I think I'm recovering now. The uh, I teach graduate level classes at Georgetown. It's in a program called Learning Design Technology. So the students are learning to become instructional designers, educational technologists, or to work with those topics in other fields. So assessment it's an interesting problem there, but it's kind of the program's really an outlier. My classes are small. My biggest one is maybe 18 at the max.
Oh.
I get to learn all of my students personally. It's really a sweet program. Uh,
Wow, that's
so,
beautiful.
but it is. But one of the things I do is a lot of scaffolding. So, in my technology seminar, the students they create annotated bibliography, and that's aimed at their final paper. In the gaming seminar that they're doing now, they have to do a pitch plan for their final project, and then develop that. So it's I also, because it's about technology, I encourage them to use AI, but also in a practical level, but also to get meta about it, to think and talk about how it works, and so it's really intertwined there. Now, some of the assessment problems that are really serious at the undergraduate level because of this, I just don't run into as often. But there is one, which is that most of my students are international. So first of all, they run into some ESL issues depending on their background,
Hmm.
especially when it comes to doing scholarly writing and scholarly reading, which is much more challenging than everyday conversation. And secondly, some of them come from experiences where there's a different understanding of intellectual integrity. Um, and
Hmm.
and so,
Mm.
but again, because this is a program about education, we can foreground this and make this work. So that's my current state of play. Again, it's pretty marginal.
Yet might be a model for the future, um, in
Yeah.
that the smaller groups, the using technology, foregrounding the technology, um, of course, that won't scale. So, there is that under the current system that won't scale. But it does sound like you've touched on all the points of the best parts of modern education, um, in those groups. But again, graduate groups, so more of a seminar style than a classroom style, apparently.
I think that one of the frustrations I have with in the way I could teach a lot more if I didn't spend so much time teaching people how to learn. And student success courses are woefully under. They often get pushed to the low end
They do.
of the uh, food chain, and they're the ones where really that's where the you would have an opportunity. If I were teaching a student success course, I would be showing people how to operate within AI. I would
Oh,
be
yes.
showing people how to, all sorts of research skills and things like that that are not basic. And I'm saying, look, this is the kind of environment that you have to work with in the real world. And then if the professor's up the food chain, so to speak, know that that's already in place. then
Yes.
you can start from a completely different level. Um, I feel a little, I kind of have to throw AI at people and then spend some time explaining it. They're going to use it anyway, especially my high school students who tend to be a little bit higher end socioeconomically
Yeah.
because I teach at a private Catholic school there, and they're all over ChatGPT. They'll use it for at the drop of a hat for anything, which is really hilarious when they're writing parts of the yearbook with ChatGPT. And I had to explain to them why it worked and why it didn't work.
Right.
But how many teachers are able to do that in today's day and age, right? I mean, in terms of our colleagues, the number of people who can think critically about how this affects, the appropriate use. I mean, it can be an incredible, like every other thing. The analogy I thought of the other day was a library. A library can be an incredible tool for learning and exploration, or it can be a maze of misinformation. And there's a lot of crappy books in libraries if they're not curated well and things like that. And if you read Mein Kampf with a non-critical eye, it might have some negative effects and things like that. I mean, that doesn't mean it shouldn't be in there, but it does mean you need certain skills in order to operate effectively in a scholarly higher educational environment, and those skills are not required for being governor of Florida, for instance. But
Or
that's the thing
president of
is
the
that
United States.
AI is democratizing a level of access that we used to reserve to people who had access to university libraries. I grew up with access to university libraries. I said my father was a professor, and so I self-educated in a university library as a child because I could just go in there and hang out,
Right.
and I had access. And if I wanted to check something out, I could check it out for the whole semester because my dad had faculty privileges. So I got used to that level of access. My high school librarian probably thought I was illiterate because I never walked into the high school library. I was like, "Wait, I've got a 2 million volume library over here, and you've got what, 50,000 maybe?" You know, maybe not that even.
Well, the problem with
But yeah.
AI as a library, though, is
Oh,
this,
it's not a good library, but
no hallucinations and lies. And
yeah, no, I don't think it's a good source for answers. I always say to people when I talk about AI is that if you're looking to it for answers, you're doing it wrong. It needs to be a way, it's a mechanism for looking for questions. And if you use it that way,
yeah.
then and use it to lead you to answers, but not expect it to give you answers, it can be an incredibly powerful tool. But that's the problem is that everybody looks at it as Google on steroids, which it's not.
Well, what I do is so I've been working with two platforms
Hmm.
a little bit. Chat GPT 4, of course, and something called Replica. And so Chat GPT is and my life has been eaten up by a lot of things, and so the stuff I started over the break is on hold, and I'm just trusting that the computer's waiting for me to come back. But I was revising my American government book, which now has to be totally revised again, damn it. And I haven't even finished revising
Uh,
it. But I have a 160-page book that is now up to 325 pages. I'm only
hmm
halfway through revising it. But what was happening is, and you guys will probably relate to this, that we can recall names of theorists off the top of our heads, but we can't recall citations. So as I'm revising my book, and every time I come across a name that I threw out, I type into ChatGPT, "Can you give me an APA reference for this author on this subject?" And bam. And now I'm up to something like, 400 references, where the first version only had like maybe 30. And I love
hmm
that. And the second thing I use it for is, can you give me a quick summary of, and then I'll read it with a critical eye and what I already know and say, that doesn't sound likely. And then I edit it. And you've got to edit that shit because the format that it speaks in is crazy talk. Um, and the other part thing oh, well, actually there's one other AI I use, which is on Zoom. And so when I Zoom teach strictly, and I with recordings my students can watch. and they have a way they can redeem themselves for their attendance. If they miss a class, they have to watch the video and respond to some questions. But the AI generator, the summary, not the transcript drives me nuts. So sometimes I'll take the whole transcript and ask ChatGPT, will you render this into a verbatim transcript with no timestamps, but please put in punctuation and paragraph breaks? And sometimes it really screws that up badly, and that really pisses me off. But the summary of the lectures from AI and Zoom, I pull those up into and I edit them from top to bottom, and what I'm left with is a damned good summary of my lectures, provided I edit them. So that's the first part. Replica, I really, really want two things from Replica. The first thing is I want a avatar that I can speak with, well, type with, I guess. Well, but actually, there's Replica allows you to actually create one that you can interact with visually, apparently. I haven't gotten that far, but what I want is a student assistant who can help me do a research assistant that can go out and get things and things I don't know how much access it has. And but what I really, really, really want, which doesn't exist yet, and keep in mind, I'm a guy who's always pissed off every day that I don't have what Star Trek would give me. I would not, all right, I'm about to enter a true future fantasy world. I want to be able to walk into my house and talk to my replica avatar and say, could you turn on some music? And so, what are your thoughts about this? I had this problem that I was dealing with these idiots on screen in a podcast. No, no. And they brought up this idea. What do you think of it? And is there any references you give me? And I'd like to have this AI that I can actually play with as a kind of a colleague.
Hmm.
Um, I
But
also
you can do that in so it's just a question of how you tune it. I mean, so what I'm using a lot lately is Notebook LM, which allows you to upload your own curated set of information
uh
and then query that. So I could see teaching a course inside of Notebook LM, upload all the materials, allow students to run queries
uh
in that, and then talk about the responses, and then use that as a way of unpacking the information in a way. And I've done this myself for my own research and stuff, and it's very, very useful for that. I can upload entire books into it. I just have to get them in PDF
Yeah,
form and things like that.
I need to learn how to do. There are so many things I don't know how to do.
It's really easy. It's really easy.
Well, you and
So
I should
I
meet
don't want to spend.
offline.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
want
So
to eat up. Yeah,
yeah,
Brian needs to go
so
cook, and
this is
so. But
pointing
let's wrap it
to
up.
the literacy of the professorate.
Yes,
Um, and
Yes.
I at
the
the Western
techno
Institute of
literacy.
Social Research, I work with older faculty. They're semi-volunteers. It's a very small graduate institute, and they're very resistant. And so that's the issue I have to deal with. But yes, so the digital literacy of faculty, which I look at as a professional requirement now,
Yes.
post-COVID, right? And before COVID, you could get away with no, I got a grad student answering my email. I don't have to learn any of this. And that was a viable position, let's just say. Don't agree with it, but it was viable.
Right.
But post-COVID,
No.
that's no longer viable. And so I'm looking forward to the day when there's actual professional development around digital literacy and information literacy and large language model literacy. And to
But
me, it's just a matter of supporting our students.
I've heard
Uh,
you struggle with them around Google Docs and Google
yeah,
applications, and that's a metaphor that's actually relevant to the real world in the sense
yeah.
of what they do. I can't imagine that same professor who can't figure out how to use a Google Doc suddenly figuring out the ins and outs of how to operate with an AI. You
Well,
know,
there's no suddenly about it, but
Yeah.
I have tried to institute some programs to lead them there. But yeah, it's
but you
it's a
got to have a
challenge.
certain mindset around the way you approach technology to recognize what it can and can't do. And, the Arthur C. Clarke quote there of any sufficiently advanced technology will resemble magic very much applies in this case. Most people look at AI as magic, and that's a bad thing. There
Yes,
is a guy
it
behind the
is.
curtain, and it's Bryan.
So especially now that it's, integrated to everything and people are just using it, sometimes not even realizing that they're using it.
Right.
It's a real issue. But we really need to wrap this
Yeah.
up.
Yeah,
Obviously, we need to have another session
yes.
here. But I've really enjoyed our conversation and want to thank my friends Bryan Alexander, Tom Haymes, and Robert Brem for joining me today and talking with machines.